is up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Somewhat Sports Podcast. My name is Chris, and I'm joined by two of the greats in this industry, Jurg, and no, the other one is not Dame. Thankfully, Dame finally took his PTO. He is not here anymore. Nah, just kidding. He'll be back soon, unfortunately.
With
But
hopefully a better, laptop or microphone setup.
yeah, hopefully, just new equipment in total. But we found the best possible alternative. He starred in our last mock draft. I believe I wanna say he's a Colts fan, if I remember correctly. I don't
Yep.
know. Okay, there we go.
Yep.
So he's a Colts fan. He is a I would say a mock draft connoisseur. He knows his QBs. He knows more than probably me, Jurg, and Dame combined. Well, definitely me and Dame combined. Jurg might have a shot. Stewie Beans, how are we? I haven't talked to you in a while. What's good, my man?
Oh, I'm good, man. Hey, Jurg hit me up, said, "Hey, you want to do this?" And I said, "Of course, I want to do this." Like, anytime I get to talk football as a whole, but the draft, the quarterbacks in the draft, anything, I'm always down. So, anytime anytime someone's like, "Hey, do you want to chat?" You just name me a time and place. We'll make it work.
You love to hear it. You absolutely love to hear it. And that's what we're doing in this episode, guys. This is a first really compared to the last couple years, Chris, because normally we might mention the draft in passing in an episode or two
Mm-hmm.
before the mock. But this is the first time we're actually going to talk a little bit more in detail about the NFL draft because, we're still quite a ways away from the NFL draft here. We are a couple weeks out from our mock draft, the third ever Somewhat Sports NFL mock draft in show history. But that doesn't mean that, we can't have some fun with it. We can't talk about. So, guys, this week we're going to go full draft analysis in terms of what has happened so far this offseason and how it is going to have a ripple effect in this upcoming 2023 draft. Now, there was the one big trade that, yes, we did talk about the show last week, but we are going to revisit the Bears and Panthers trade more from the perspective of solely on the draft itself, what it does for both teams, but what it does to, and as Chris alluded to, Stu being an expert on this position, the quarterback position rankings, because now who's going first is going to be a very interesting question because I feel like there's plenty of debate to go around with it. How does it affect the Texans at number 2? And does it affect anyone else potentially, in this draft? Maybe a certain team that somebody on the show roots for as well. So we're going to have that is going to be the predominant, really the crux of the opening of it. Before we get to the meat and potatoes, as my old compatriot Bars would usually say, shout out to my boy. And, we're going to look at what's happened in free agency so far. And Stu, being the genius that he is, has a list of teams that he has set and ready as to, what have they done so far in free agency and how that's going to affect things in this upcoming draft. And, after we talk it out with Stu, if maybe there's an extra team or two that we think of, Chris, we could definitely enter them in the conversation as well. Last year's NFL draft, was wild with a bunch of trade ups. It was wide receiver heavy. There was a lot of trades for a lot of the wide receivers like Jahan Dotson with the Commanders. And, the Eagles trading not for a receiver in that draft, but for A.J. Brown. So much can happen on the day of the draft itself. And maybe we could get, a little bit of a feeling of what could happen based off of the machinations so far. So with that being said, I throw it back to our proper leader of the ship here.
Oh, all right. I guess I'll take it back. Yeah. So as we said last week, we talked about the Bears Panthers trade. Kind of a blockbuster. But we kind of knew that the Bears were going to trade the first overall pick. Stu, I don't know about you, but I think I could speak for me, Jurg Dame and I think that like the Panthers being the one to trade for that first overall pick came as kind of a surprise. They were kind of a dark horse in terms of like who would trade up. We heard about a bunch of teams possibly moving up to one. I feel like I did not hear the Panthers leading up to that trade, but both teams did make that trade. What did you make of the Panthers being the one team to make that trade for the first overall pick? What did you make of the trade package in total overall for both teams?
Yeah, I mean, I was pissed, I guess, as a Colts fan because it's like, at what point do you know just from my perspective, at what point do the Colts, make a move that changes their organization completely around? Now, for the Panthers, I thought it was a great move. I thought it was something that they needed to do, and they're in the perfect situation because you were going to be stuck with a guy who either Will Levis, who has his ups and downs, or you got a guy in Anthony Richardson who we all saw tear it up at the combine, but the film says, probably needs a year or 2 years to at least learn because he's not necessarily the best guy for the job. And so you have your pick of the litter, shall I say, trading up to the number 1 overall pick. You could talk about the compensation, but here's the thing: in 5 years, if we're looking back and C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson or Will Levis, whoever they take number 1 overall, is a top 5 quarterback in this draft, I don't think the compensation really matters at that point. I think the Bears have done. I think the Bears did a great job. I'm shocked they went as far back to 9 as they did. I this kind of tells me that Jalen Carter getting arrested affected how they made the decision because you wouldn't drop back to 4. You wouldn't drop back all the way to 9 if Jalen Carter was your guy because he would have been in all. If everything was the way it was, he would have already been gone. So that tells you that they feel like maybe they can get him at 9, or maybe they can get a key defensive player or offensive player and add to what they've already got with the draft picks they got from Carolina.
So, I mean, it's safe to say that I guess everyone was kind of surprised about this deal. I do want to ask you. I know we want to like kind of get into like what this means for draft implications, but here's what my takeaway on this, Stu, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Like, you were a little bummed, I guess, as a Colts fan. I will say this. I don't necessarily know if the Colts not moving up was the worst thing because, like, I feel like next year's draft is kind of the draft to kind of go all in for, in my opinion, because that's the Caleb Williams draft, correct? So, like,
Yeah.
were you like, was that kind of the silver lining, like the beacon of life? Where you were just like, oh man, we didn't trade up for this draft, but I mean, next year's draft, it might be the one to kind of swing for that home run because of the Caleb Williams draft. So, as a Colts fan, like, was that kind of something that you kind of looked at and you were just like, well, not the worst thing in the world. And to be honest, Anthony Richardson as a backup QB for the Colts doesn't sound too bad in my opinion. But you're the Colts fan, like, let me know what you think of that.
Well, as far as the trade for next year goes, and I agree with you. I think both Caleb Williams and Drake May are going to be once in a generation type quarterbacks. I know we throw that around a lot these days and all that kind of stuff, but they truly are going to be difference makers in the way that they play the game. But I think what the NFL teams are looking at, what we're looking at is, heading into August, we all looked at this draft class as, oh my God, this is going to be one of the top, quarterback draft classes we've seen in a long, long time. Then Will Levis disappointed. Tyler Van Dyke from Miami kind of disappointed. He was one of the top guys people thought was going to come off. There were a lot of guys who everyone thought was going to perform well that didn't perform well this year and kind of fell down the draft boards. And some of them went back to college. Some of them, decided not to enter the NFL draft. And so you look at it and you say, all right, well, the Colts didn't trade up. So what does that mean? That means one of two things. Either they hadn't done enough homework yet to be extremely convicted by one of these quarterbacks, whether it be C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, or they kind of have 3 guys who are all around the same grade and all those types of things. Listen, I hope I would want nothing more. This sounds bad because as a fan, you always want your team to win. But if we're going to suck and we're going to get a top pick, I would love nothing more than for it to be in the Drake May, Caleb Williams draft. But the city of Indianapolis might be burnt to the ground if that happens. Like if the Colts, I've said this, if the Colts, because I have a different idea now that the Colts don't have the number 1 overall pick as to what I think they should do based off of who I like at quarterbacks and stuff like that. But even in that scenario, if they do that, I think if the Colts make it through day 1, they don't have a rookie quarterback on their roster, like it's going to be bad up there in Indianapolis. There's going to be a lot of things going on. There's going to be riots on West 56th Street down there. And so there's going to be a lot of questions as to what the Colts are going to do. I have a lot of questions of what the Colts are going to do. I hope they make the right decision, obviously, but we'll see because it's probably going to be Levis or it's probably going to be Anthony Richardson, neither of which I feel like deserve to go in that spot. But, that's a conversation for a little bit later on down in this podcast.
Right. It's Chris, tell me not. It's always the quarterbacks that are the most interesting thing, because you think back to our mock draft from last year.
Yep.
What do we have? How many of the QBs do we have going first round? I think just 2, right?
Man, it was a blur.
Yeah.
Who was?
I think it was Pickett and Willis. I think were the 2 guys we had going in the first round last year, and only
Yeah,
one of them goes.
Yeah, Willis went 3rd round, I think, right?
Yeah, it's just because I love that Stu mentions it, especially at 4th overall with the Colts, because at the end of the day, I've said this, Stu, I think you agree with me on the logic of, if there is any position we've seen in the NFL draft that teams are going to be willing to overdraft for, it's the quarterback position, bar none. Like, that's always the position that teams are going to be willing to trade up for, to use that high overall pick on, because the belief is that if you're going to use it on a singular position, I mean, it has to be the position that has the control of the ball most of the time, and it would be that.
100%. Let's talk about it, though. I mean, you want to talk about over drafting. I think that's what's going to happen this year. I mean, I had a guy from the Draft Network on my podcast, and we kind of talked about the Anthony Richardson, Will Levis guy, because I'm not a huge fan of either one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like the tape necessarily of either one of them. And he brought up a good point. He said if these guys were running backs, we would be talking about them in the 4th or 5th round. But these guys are quarterbacks. And to have the season that they had last year, for them to still be considered top 10 picks is really kind of crazy. But, you got guys like Mel Kiper and Todd McShay, and you got guys over on other networks as well, on the NFL Network, that have been talking about the big arm, the big body, the 6'5", 235, can move, all that stuff that comes with Will Levis. And it's like, that's great, but the tape says he's not very good. And then with Anthony Richardson, it's like, that's great. He can run the 4.240. He's 6'4", 244. He jumps out of a gym. He did everything I said he was going to do in the NFL Combine. But I wrote an article about it, and we could talk about the study if you want. I did a deep dive in a study. As history says, guys who have the completion percentage that he has does not work out in the NFL. It just doesn't work out. There's only been one guy, and it's been Josh Allen. People want to say he's the example. I think he's more of the outlier.
Right. No, I'm with you, Stu. This is one of those things that I try to take into drafts with other sports, predominantly the NBA draft, because that's the only other league that we've done a mock draft for here on the pod, where, like, I feel like a Josh Allen, there's people always try to, like, when there's something like Allen that happens, they try to create that to the new trend, but it's not a trend. Like you said, it's an outlier. It's a blip in the radar of consistency that has been, hey, this player, this archetype, but with these stats, it just doesn't work out. And that's
100%. I don't mean to cut you off, Jerry, but I did a study because all I heard about was Anthony Richardson, and I wanted to do the study. I wanted to see, just to kind of gather some information for myself. And so I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back for the last 22 years. So from the 2022 NFL draft to 2000. And I'm going to look at first round quarterbacks. I'm going to, one, see how many first round quarterbacks were drafted with the completion percentage in the 50s or lower. And two, how many of those first round guys that were drafted with that completion percentage or lower worked out. So I went back all the way to 2000. I found 8 guys. Out of those 8 guys, only one of them, which is Josh Allen, will we consider to be a top 3 guy in the NFL, or to have a successful NFL career. And so it's very weird to me and funny to me that, and I get it. And there's a lot to like about Anthony Richardson. We could talk about scenarios to work with Anthony Richardson, but it's very interesting to me that when we look at history and we look at how things have worked out with Anthony Richardson, history is not on his side. History says, completing a 54% completion percentage and doing the things that he does, he's probably not going to work out. And yet this guy is a guy who we're talking about going to be maybe the 5th pick of the NFL draft, going to Seattle potentially, all kinds of crazy things. And it's like, you hate to see that, because I had a 3rd round grade on him coming out. That was before the combine. But you look at it and you're like, man, I don't know necessarily what's going to happen with a guy like Anthony Richardson, because he's just so hard to predict, especially with the way that history says it's not on his side.
Right. Chris, do you see this? He's writing articles. He's doing studies. He's got grades. Stu is the guy. He is our. He's
a wizard, dog.
He's better than Mel Kiper. I'll say it right now. Stu's better than Mel Kiper.
Hey, he's your colleague. You better be careful.
OD.
Oh my god.
Don't get him fired, Jerry. You always yell at us for not getting you fired. So don't be that guy. Yeah, I mean, what a beautiful analysis right there. I mean, I'm kind of high on Anthony Richardson. Like, I know it's like it's kind of a high risk, high reward with him, but I like, to be honest, I think whatever team he goes to, if he does go to the Seahawks, I do think, like, obviously he'll come off the bench, and I do think the time he needs to develop, he'll have that with the Seahawks. If he goes to the Colts, I think, like, he'll eventually be a start. I mean, I don't know what their situation is for, like, who will possibly be the starting quarterback for them, but I do think he'll be in the running for that. Like, he has a high chance for that. But again, situation matters here. But let's talk about Bears Panthers trade. So clearly, Panthers go. Let's talk about the Panthers first, because they have the first overall pick. They're probably going to go quarterback, which means either Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. Stu, for a long time, I think Bryce Young was. I don't know if it was for a long time, but I think for a while, Bryce Young seemed like the consensus pick, and then CJ Stroud started making the rounds, and then it was kind of back and forth. I know there's the whole situation with Bryce Young's height. I do want to get your perspective on that, but, like, gun to my head, I think they take CJ Stroud here. Frank Reich seems to be enamored with him. Who do you think the Panthers will take? Who do you think the Panthers should take in terms of those two quarterbacks? And also, in addition to that, what do you make of the whole Bryce Young height thing? Are you a tall quarterbacks kind of guy, or do you, like, not mind the height? Do you think Bryce Young might be that guy to kind of, break that mold?
Yeah, I'll start with that. The Bryce Young thing. It's not the height that worries me. It's not the 5'10" that worries me. It's the 195 that he played at
Mm.
the University of Alabama. And I understand he took some shots in college, but even like routine hits, he looked like he got lit up on routine hits, and he was flying through the air, and you're like, man, that was brutal. But then you see CJ Stroud take the same hit, and you're like, well, that looked different. How come that didn't look as brutal? And it's just because of his frame. It's not the height that I worry about. The guy's a great processor, as you hear Mel Kiper talk about. He's got the Patrick Mahomes type of arm. He has all kinds of talent. And I've said this before. If Bryce Young was 6'2", I don't think there's any question as to who the number one overall pick is. I think you would be hearing talks about Bryce Young being in the same breath as a guy like Trevor Lawrence when he came out, as those once in a generation type of quarterbacks. But he's not. But also, let me say this as well. I thought about this yesterday. I went back. I'm kind of a nerd. I like to watch old drafts, and I was watching when Russell Wilson got picked, and Mel Kiper came on and said, well, if he was 6'5", he would be the number one overall pick over Andrew Luck. Well, guess what? As much as I love Andrew Luck, the best quarterback in that draft class has been Russell Wilson to this point. And so as I sit here and tell you, if he were 6'5", he'd be the one of the top generational quarterbacks. The same thing was said about Russell Wilson, and the guy's a shoe-in for the Hall of Fame, despite what kind of season he had last year. So, yeah, it's not the size, it's not the height, it's the weight that worries me. Now, to the Panthers, who do I think they're going to take? I think it's going to be CJ Stroud. Just off of everything that I've seen, I think it's going to be CJ Stroud. That's also who they should take. CJ Stroud's my number one quarterback in this draft class. He was my number one quarterback in this draft class when it wasn't cool to have him as your number one quarterback in this draft. Dan Orlovsky just made him his number one guy. Chris Sims just made him his number one guy. Bucky Brooks made him his number one guy. I had it when he was losing to Michigan. Everybody was killing him for losing to Michigan. He was still my number one guy. I've been on it since I realized week 4 the Colts sucked. I was like, please bring CJ to Indianapolis, please. And so I'm a big CJ Stroud guy. I've said this before. If you just took, he doesn't have the greatest arm talent by any means. Don't take this as being horrible by any means. But if you took his 10 best throws and you paired it up with any other quarterback in this draft class, he's got the 10 best throws. As far as talking about ball placement, layering the football, and what I mean by that is over the linebacker's head, but it drops before the safety gets there. All those types of things, CJ Stroud's very, very good at, and he's the best in the draft at doing that. My pro comp for him, I did a high end, low end for him. My high end was Joe Burrow. I think this is a guy who can just change a franchise and those types of things. And for me, the low end is Jared Goff. He's a guy who shows flashes, shows potential, but doesn't consistently put it together. Both guys are really, really good. Both guys would be guys who GMs would love to have. But, and I want to wrap it up by saying this narrative that the only time he ran around and did all this stuff was against Georgia. Go watch the IU game where he tucks it and goes for 15 yards up the sideline. He scrambles out, makes a couple other throws. I know it's Indiana University, but there's a game off the top of your head there. The Penn State game, he was kind of mobile at, and same with the whole Michigan game. It didn't work out, but he showed that ability that he did there in Georgia. Everyone's blowing this out of proportion that he didn't move a lot in college. It's there. You just have to go find it.
Well, Jurg, I think we know who Stu's going to take if he gets the first pick in the mock draft. That we're going to have. So kind of a spoiler. Yeah.
Real quick, if I may here,
go ahead,
Chris, because this is my thing. So Stu, you with CJ Stroud going to the Panthers at number 1, let's just lock that idea in here. When it comes to let's move down the draft board a little bit now, because I think we've said all our piece here for the Panthers, Chris. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what happens after that. So then the perception would be that the Texans. Fun. Exactly. The perception is that the Texans would then go with Bryce Young at number 2. So let's assume that also happens here. 1 and 2, the quarterbacks go. I mean, if you want to talk about Bryce Young to the Texans at 2, Stu, maybe if you have a differing opinion, or if you're going to just
he's the second best quarterback in this draft class. All right. If Stroud goes 1, Young's going 2.
Okay. There we go. So then after that, Stu, because this is part of the reason why I was excited for this episode. What happens after that? Because you mentioned, I know you mentioned your Colts in number 4, and you could talk about that, but also because aside from the Bears pre-draft, the Cardinals were a team that, depending on what was going to happen, could a team have traded up to number 3? And again, maybe this is where you talk about an overdraft for a guy like a Richardson or a Levis, where if a team really falls in love, they want to make sure they get their guy. So, Stu, do you think that with the Panthers having traded up to 1 here, does this affect the draft in terms of, whereas some people were talking about how, for sure a team is going to trade up to get Will Levis. Do you think that might make it where maybe what I'm trying to say is, will a team hesitate on that now? Or because Young and Stroud are going at the top 2, if there's only 2 other projected first-round QBs left, I'm just putting in Richardson because he's been mentioned so much in the mainstream conversation, will that make a team want to trade up with the Cardinals or whoever's selecting after the Colts at 5 or 6? Or do you think teams are in the reevaluation process of okay, those guys are off the board. Would it be smart to trade up for them?
I think, and by the way, Stu, before you go, I really do think, Jurg, to kind of just quickly on that, I think that Jalen Carter here might be a wild card in terms of just what could go on in that first top 10. What do you think, Stu?
I agree. I mean, I haven't gone anywhere from 6 to 11, just based off of, what do I think, needs, those types of things. To answer your question, Jurg, it gets fun at 3 and 4. It really does, because not as much as it did when the Bears had the number 1 overall pick. And I say that because, and not as much as it did, I'm going to kind of spoil one of my picks for the free agency. Not as much as it did before free agency, because the only team I was really worried about jumping the Indianapolis Colts at that 3 spot was Las Vegas. But Las Vegas has their guy, at least for the next 3 years. And I don't see necessarily Josh McDaniels. Of course, this is the same guy who drafted Tim Tebow in the first round, so maybe I'm wrong. But I don't see Josh McDaniels signing Jimmy G to what they signed him to trade up to Arizona's pick to take a guy like Will Levis or to take a guy like Anthony Richardson. So then the only other team I see is Seattle. Now, Seattle has 2 first-round picks in this draft class. Do they want to move up to go get an Anthony Richardson? Are they convicted by Anthony Richardson? I've seen videos. I've heard things where Pete Carroll talks very, very highly of a guy like Anthony Richardson. But let me tell you something. A lot of it is a feel thing. I know people are like, well, you don't know who these NFL teams are going to take. Well, let me give you an example. 2020, Jordan Love was on the board. The Green Bay Packers traded up to take Jordan Love. Do you know why they traded up to take Jordan Love? Because they heard rumors of of teams like the Indianapolis Colts and others who are trying to trade back up into the first round to get a Jordan Love. So these teams hear things, they talk to each other, they hear different types of things. And so At 3, the only real team I see out in the top 10 trading up to make that is Seattle. Now, if you want to talk about an outside the top 10 team, we're looking at Tampa Bay potentially. You're looking at the Buccaneers. What kind of decisions do they make there? But outside of Seattle, there isn't a team in the top 10 I think you got to worry about. Jumping the Indianapolis Colts, maybe Atlanta, but I think they're playing the long game. I think they're gonna roll Des and Ritter out there.
Mm-hmm.
If it works, great. If it doesn't, Caleb Williams, here we come. Drake May, here we come, type of thing. And so I think Atlanta's got more things on their mind right now than drafting a quarterback. Could be wrong, but I don't see it happening. So for me, it's really Seattle at 5. And if they don't make that leap, man, what do the Colts do at 4 is going to be the question leading up until they make that pick.
And it certainly is interesting. Funny enough, with 2 NFC West teams, so this is what the Colts are sandwiched in between. With a team like the Cardinals that obviously don't need quarterback because they have their quarterback. They've paid their franchise quarterback. He's just hurt. Chris.
I know. They're in a tough spot, the Cardinals, I feel like.
If he just lays off the Call of Duty, I think he'd be all right.
He's not doing that, though.
Is there a new Call of Duty coming out during the next NFL season? Have we confirmed that yet?
Is it not? I think that their rehab will be a little quicker, I feel like.
Will it be quicker or will it be delayed? Like
that's actually a good point. Yeah.
Is he going to delay his rehab sessions to get more COD sessions in?
Spoke too soon. Stu, one team we actually didn't talk about for like in terms of like what they might do in the draft is the Chicago Bears, who actually did trade the first overall pick. They go to number 9 now. They got a shit ton of draft capital in this trade package, but they seem to have had an eventful offseason, to say the least. 9th overall pick. I personally predict, I said this last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago when we talked about the trade, that they're going to go offensive lineman. Maybe a Paris Johnson there, Skoronsky. Did I say his name right? Skoronsky, there you go. So I feel like they're going to go one of those two. I don't know, but I do think overall, like, they're going to go offensive line. What do you make of the Bears in this draft, and what do you think they might do with the 9th overall pick? I don't want to, like, make you spoil it because, like, God knows you might have the 1st or 9th pick in our mock draft, but is it fair to say that they might go offensive lineman for number 9?
Very possible. For a guy who I'm very high on, Justin Fields' sake, I hope so. I hope it's offensive line. But I look at it, they have Matt Eberflus, who's a defensive-minded guy. They're probably going to feel like, hey, we did our part. We got him DJ Moore. He's got Chase Claypool, those types of things. At first, I thought maybe, before I saw the details and I saw DJ Moore was involved, I thought maybe that'd be a great spot for Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jordan Addison, whoever, depending on who they thought the number 1 pick or who they thought the top receiver was. But I think so. I think this is a great spot for maybe a Paris Johnson Jr. from Ohio State at offensive tackle, or Peter Skoronsky, like you mentioned, from Northwestern. Those could be some sneaky good picks. Somebody else to consider if they decide they're not going to take a flyer on the player that goodness gracious, drew a blank. They're not going to take a player on the kid from Georgia. They're not going to take a flyer on him. Then here's my point. I think maybe they take Tyree Wilson if they don't take Jalen Carter. Tyree Wilson's a guy out of Texas Tech who's getting a lot of hype at the moment. Here's the thing. They have a defensive-minded head coach who, granted, did have the luxury of 1 year playing for Andrew Luck. And I think understands that, man, if you don't surround a quarterback, especially a very, very good quarterback with some weapons or an offensive line or those types of things, it could get very ugly very quick. So that could be a decision there. The Bears are the one that keeps me up at night when I do mock drafts because I'm just not sure what they're going to do, what decisions they're going to make. They're the question mark here because they could go in 1,000 different directions, and yet they're not tipping their cards yet. They're at the poker table and they're not doing anything. They got a poker face on the whole time. You're not sure what they're going to do. So they're tough. they're tough to do. When I do mock drafts, when I look at them, especially now, I haven't done one since the trade happened. It's going to happen in a couple weeks, but man, dude, I don't know. They're tough. It's going to be tough, and that's going to be the team I look at. I think it's going to depend on how the board falls for them, depending on what happens, because Atlanta could take Peter Skoronski at 8, I think, so the pick before them. So are they convicted with Paris Johnson Jr., or is it like Peter Skoronski and then Jalen Carter, or Peter Skoronski and Tyree Wilson? Like those types of things matter, just depending on how the board falls.
Draft board season is the best time of year for sure. And I like what Stu said, because it's the team that you know nothing about is the team to be most fearful for. Because I'm kind of with Stu. Like, if I get the Bears at 9th overall in our mock, I have no idea what I'm going to do with them, because you could go in so many different directions. Because that team, like we kind of talked about when we discussed the trade last week, Chris, like they need a lot. This is a team that, like, yeah, they've made some nice signings in free agency, but they did trade away Roquan Smith last season to the Ravens. This is a team that does need to build up that offensive line, because, like Stu said, you got a coach there in Matt Eberflus who, like, he saw firsthand what happened to Andrew Luck after years and years of not supporting him. So you got to feel that's a focus here on a young Jim and Ryan Poles to make sure that he supports the franchise quarterback, even though it's not the guy that he drafted. He would like for that to be successful if he could be known as the guy that, hey, I took someone else's pick and made it work. So that's always a nice thing as well. Stu mentions draft boards. I just mentioned free agency. This is the perfect convergence point for the next portion of the show, because we are going to talk about right now Stu's list of teams. And if me and Chris have, any things to say about it as well, or if we bring up a team that maybe, was active or lack thereof active, we can bring it up to Stu in his mind as well.
I'll pause after my teams to kind of give you guys a little moment if you want. We can talk about it. We can discuss it.
For sure. But Stu, let's start with, I don't know how many you have like off rip, but let's go with the first team, or in whatever order that you deem it so, based on the offseason. Who, based off of what happened in free agency to this team, based on who they gained or who they lost, and how is that affecting teams going into the draft over the next month? Because, like, it doesn't matter, we're a month away, people. You got to realize that these teams have been working on the draft for a while, and if anything, this is not, Stu, you'd agree, this is not prep period. This is ramp up period for all these teams looking at the draft now. Like, this is the time where they really are setting to finalize their draft boards overall for next month.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have an idea at this point who you're going to take. It's just gathering some final information, all that type of stuff. I agree with you.
Yes, sir. So, team numero uno that you got for us, Stu?
Yeah, I'm going to start off with this. I said this when I did my first mock draft. I mocked this guy there, and I got absolutely murdered on Twitter for this.
Oof.
And Philadelphia losing Miles Sanders sets it up perfectly for them to take a top 8 player in this draft, top 7 on my rough draft billboard or big board. Who would not love to see Bijan Robinson with Jalen Hurts? You're talking about a guy who we're going to look at up there with Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry, teaming that up with Jalen Hurts. Like, I would have said, well, they lost, Darius Slay, so maybe they'll go corner here now. But no, they kept Darius Slay after that weird, they traded him, they didn't trade him type of thing, whatever it was. They let Miles Sanders go. He's off to Carolina. You need a running back. Sorry, I think it's Kenneth Gainwell. Ain't going to get the job done. And sure, you can get a guy in the second round, but why would you do that when you have a chance to partner Bijan Robinson with Jalen Hurts? I'm speaking it into existence because I hope it happens. That would be fun to watch. And Jurg, I'm not a take a running back in the first round. Definitely not a take a running back in the top 10 guy.
Right.
But he's a top 7 player in this draft. And there's only about 14 guys who are really standing on the table and say is a first round pick. And this year, there's a lot of guys who are first to second, all that kind of stuff. Don't want to get into that. But free agency wise, yes, Philadelphia losing Miles Sanders sets them up beautifully at number 10 to take Bijan Robinson.
And that's one of those things. I love that. Chris, we talked about it actually last week. The thing that I was the most interested in, Stu, going for the rest of free agency and going into the draft was, what did the teams that made it, what did the final 4 teams from last year. So the Chiefs, the Eagles, the 49ers, and the Bengals, what were they going to do this offseason in order to adjust their roster based off of who they would lose and who they could potentially acquire? And I like the fact that you mentioned that, because for all that the Eagles like the Eagles have retained a couple pieces, like obviously keeping Jason Kelsey for one more year. The fact he's coming back was big for their offensive line, despite the fact that Cam Jurgens, I think, people
Cam
in that
what?
Cam Jurgens,
Uh,
people in that organization are more than confident in that selection, because apparently Jason Kelsey like told the Eagles that like he should be the guy. Like he, I forget what it was. He gave them their input that he thought that he would be the guy to come in. But that stuff always interests me. Like, what did the teams from last year? Like, yes, the number one, number two, number three overall pick teams on a consistent basis. We have two Jets fans on this podcast, so they could speak to that on a regular basis. Like, those teams are nice, but I'm always interested to see what the contending teams are going to do. So I like the fact that you bring that up when it comes to the Eagles too. Is there, like, I haven't done my full like analysis on all the prospects yet. Was there, and maybe this got shifted because they were able to maintain Bradbury and Slay, but is there a safety that they could have considered? Is there a safety that could be considered for a moment, like a maybe not definitive top 10, but like maybe like a 10 to 14, 15 range where the Eagles would have been comfortable with? Or part of this is because they can't necessarily replace the loss of like a CJ at the 10th overall pick because of how you've mocked the draft so far.
Yeah, man. There's not a Kyle Hamilton in this draft, right?
Mm.
Kyle Hamilton was a top 3 player on my big board last year. I loved Kyle Hamilton. He kind of fell to the prospect, fatigue type thing. Brian Branch is my number 1 safety out of
yeah,
Alabama.
yeah.
They have a better shot, I think. It would be a reach, a very, very big reach for them to take him at 10. They could get him with their second pick, with their second first round pick. There's a chance he could be there. You may have to trade up a few spots and maybe get him in the late teens. But I think they could get him with that second pick that they have in the first round there for sure. I think so. The safety class isn't as deep as it's been in years past. There's probably only going to be one that goes in the first round. I was really looking at corner for them because there's a lot of guys I liked. But like I said, after they brought back Darius Slay, there's not really anybody that fits that role. So maybe they take Brian Branch at 10. I think that'd be a reach, in my opinion. I think it'd be a very big reach, but it's likely. And it's very, very much likely. And they lost a lot. I mean, they lost a lot of pieces that I think is not getting talked about. So they could also go offensive line preparing for Jason Kelsey's retirement next year. Kind of training that next great offensive tackle, whether it's Skoronski, Paris Johnson Jr., Osiris Torrance from Florida. So I don't know, but I'll look at a couple of the glaring needs, and you brought up the safety. The running back's also a glaring need, especially when all you got on your roster is Kenneth Gainwell.
I just want to say, for the record, I'm going to hold a grudge against whoever takes Osiris Torrance in our mock before me, because I love that name. That is my leading name in the mock right now, because god dang, that's very good, both first and last name. I just want to put that out there really fast. Chris, do you have any thoughts about Stu's Bijan Robinson pick? I mean, like it sounds like an amazing selection, especially when you consider the offense that they run there in Philly.
Yeah, I mean, I to be honest, I think it would shake the draft up a bit, and I would love that. I don't know, like Philly could do a lot of things here. Like I think they're in a good position to kind of take a risk, but I think after like the kind of losses they've had this offseason, maybe it's not as like they don't have that much of a safety blanket as we thought they would have, just because like they kind of have to nail some of these picks because like they've lost so much. So I don't know. I if Stu says the dynamic duo of Robinson and Jalen Hurts is as powerful as he thinks it'd be, why not? Why not? I don't mind
You
it.
also have to think here too. You got to come up with a way to replace 1,400 yards
But it's true.
or 1,600 yards or whatever it was. He had a career year. Miles Sanders did, and so you could probably get that in the late rounds with guys like Dwayne McBride out of UAB or A Chain out of Texas A&M. There's some good guys in the late rounds, but my thought process is for all the signs are pointing to Bijan Robinson being the next one of those guys as far as Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry. You team that up there with a Jalen Hurts, and for me, you're salivating at the mouth, especially when a guy like Nick Sirianni help draft Jonathan Taylor. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. But I look at it and I say their big glaring need on offense is running back. They're missing 1,400 yards. So, that could be a big need there. Please pardon the water bottle crunching in the background. My dog's having a heyday. So.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, I'm looking
more
at
than
like the
fine.
teams now. I don't like. He's not. I don't think he's gonna go in the top 5. I don't think the Lions are gonna take him. Raiders already have Josh Jacobs. Falcons, no. Bears, no. I don't think the Bears would take him. They have other needs.
But if he doesn't go at 10, here's the thing though, he's going to fall all the way back to maybe Buffalo in
Whoa.
the back end of the draft. I just don't see a lot of teams.
Clamoring for him.
Yes, and it's not his fault. He's a top 8 player in this draft. Don't get me wrong, but it's just the teams that are in between 10 and whatever it is, 23 or 25 that the Bills have, or maybe it's later than that. A lot of them already have key running backs in place and already have, some guys that are cheap on some deals that have been productive or relatively successful for them. So you go all the way back and you look and you say, if they don't take him at 10, he probably falls to Buffalo at 23. And man, oh man, what a pick that would be for Buffalo.
Indeed.
Hope that doesn't happen.
I was gonna say, as with our 2 Jets fans here, you're giving Chris some nightmare fuel right now, Stu.
Well, I mean, they'll probably take Jahmyr Gibbs anyways, which is Alvin Kamara 2.0, if Bijan is off the board. So be prepared.
Still giving Chris the nightmare fuel there. But anyways, so we talked about the Eagles there, and definitely a lot to say. I was gonna say my point too, if they do decide to go with that on the actual draft day here, is the fact that now that you're gonna have to end up paying Jalen Hurts here pretty soon. At least we're all going to be assuming they're going to be doing that. You now need to look at the idea of surrounding Jalen Hurts, in the opposite way of normally when you get a rookie quarterback on the rookie pay scale for those 4 or 5 years. That then you pay for the skill position talent. This is going to be the case where you're going to pay your quarterback. Now you got to really use the draft to find the skill position talent. The Chiefs have been kind of doing that since they've paid Patrick Mahomes, and they've been trying to get guys. They drafted Sky Moore last year. This wasn't the guy they drafted, but a guy who's still, I think, 2 more years on his rookie contract, and a Kadarius Toney. Like, you need to make these kinds of moves to fill in production of guys that you probably are going to have to end up getting rid of. In that. So that could also just play into the mindset if they do end up going that way. But Bijan Robinson to the Eagles would certainly be entertaining, to say the very least here. So that was team number 1. Who do we have next up here, Stu? I mean, that was such a banger of a start. I can't wait for who else we got on this list.
I think Jimmy Garoppolo really throws a whole wrench into this quarterback conversation. I think he really, really does. So you look at it and you say, okay, how does that affect their draft? They made the Las Vegas Raiders, think about this, made Sam Ehlinger, or was it Matt Ryan? Either way, made them look like a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback at this point in Matt Ryan's career and where Sam Ehlinger is, and gave Jeff Saturday their first win. A big part of that is they don't have much of a secondary. They honestly haven't had a secondary in probably 3 years. And so you look at it, Christian Gonzalez from Oregon's a guy I love. The Witherspoon kid from Illinois is a guy I love. Joey Porter's there. Like, this makes sense now that you take that corner, one of these top corners, because there's probably going to be 5 or 6 that go in the first round. Let's just get the train started. Let's go and get your corner there at 7 where they're at. I think that's the most likely scenario now.
Yeah, I also think because the Lions kind of made some moves in free agency so far that kind of cleaned up their secondary. Because I would have thought if like the I would have for sure mocked Christian Gonzalez to the Lions, but I do think they made some signings here that makes it seem like they won't go cornerback. I don't know. That's just my guess.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think they do either. I think if all else fails, I look at Detroit and I say, Will Anderson's off the board. Where are they looking? They're either looking at, in my opinion, 3 guys. Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech. They're going to go Miles Murphy from Clemson, or they're going to go Jalen Carter from Georgia. You team those guys up with Aiden Hutchinson, and you talk about the havoc you're going to wreak on the NFC North for the next, 10 years. It's going to be tough for guys like Jalen Hurts or Justin Fields and Jordan Love and, all those guys. Kirk Cousins, who I love, by the way, but isn't mobile. So, you look at it, those could be three guys right there that have Dan Campbell salivating at the mouth.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, Stu, but like, I could speak for Jurg on this one, and maybe Dame, I don't know, but we're very bullish, very high on the Lions going forward. Like, that is one of our teams to look out
100%.
for. Yep.
I think there's very much reason to.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they've done it the right way. I feel like they've put together a team. And I don't think they're a team that's going to be like, maybe if he falls there, they may pull the trigger. But in so much of this, like, oh my God, you got to have one of these next great quarterback type of guys. They're like, listen, we got Jared Goff. He played very, very well last year. And this is the same thing I tell Viking fans that want to get rid of Kirk Cousins. That's great. But who are you going to get that puts up the production that Jared Goff put up? Like, okay, get rid of the guy. You're going to take Anthony Richardson. He's going to sit for 2 years. So you're going to roll out Blau from Purdue if he's still on the team. Like, who are you going to roll out there if you make this decision? So for me, they've done it the right way. They're building pieces around for when they do take that chance and they do get their number one quarterback, whether they trade up next year and they get a Caleb Williams or a Drake May, and you team them up with, all the weapons they got, DeAndre Swift and now Jamal Williams with Jameson Williams, all those things. You look at it, I agree. This is a team who, for the first time in a long, long time, the future of the Detroit Lions looks bright.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think they lost
Lions
Jamal
fans
Williams,
will
though,
say
right?
that.
Right, Jurg?
Sadly, they did.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. My
Yep.
bad.
But who did they get? Who did they
David
get?
Montgomery from
there
the
you go.
Bears.
David Montgomery. That's who I was thinking of.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, I was going to say really fast here, Stu, because there are a couple teams here with multiple picks, but especially like the Seahawks and the Lions. And I just want to clump them into a question real quick because of how terrible those defenses were last year. Do you think there's a likelihood that those two teams could go defense with both those selections? Like,
Yeah,
I know
for
it's
sure.
how the draft falls, but like, let's say if they get a perfect scenario, like, do you see it because I think it was last year's draft, if I'm not mistaken, where the Packers had the 2 first and they got 2 defensive players with those picks. So what do you think would be the odds here that both of those teams would go defense with both those first round selections? Because I mean, on both sides, you got the skill position, you got a lot of skill position talent on each side, and yes, you have older quarterbacks, but those are both quarterbacks. Like, I've been hard on Jared Goff before, I'll admit that, but he had a very good season. And to me, I'm putting Geno Smith in the Seattle Seahawks Ring of Honor because he just outshined Russell Wilson in all his glory last year, so that made me happy. But in all seriousness, to their picks, like defense, like do you see both those teams going all in on the defensive side here?
It's very possible. I think the only outlier in that's going to be how do the Seattle Seahawks view Anthony Richardson, as we talked about earlier. But I agree. If that those defenses aren't great, and so I look at it and I say my second defensive end is Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech. I don't like to do that where I'm like, oh, they'll take who my number 2 guy is because my number 2 guy may not be their number 2 guy. But you look at it, whether it's Miles Murphy, whether it's, Tyree Wilson, heck, could be Nolan Smith after the performance he put up. We know that, Pete Carroll's no stranger to taking risk in the first round. They trade up and took Rashad Penny in the first round. So, I mean, he's not afraid to take guys he's convicted by. And then you look later on in the draft, they could get a corner, Cam Smith, maybe Keely Ringo's still there, whoever. Maybe they're fascinated by that, or maybe there's someone else there that they like. Maybe they take Branch. Maybe they take Brian Branch, or maybe it just depends. There's a lot of situations. Maybe Brian Brees falls and they take Brian Breezy as well. Now your defensive line all of a sudden looks very, very fierce if you're playing in their division. So there's a lot to look at, but definitely, for sure, it could 110% happen. I'm not saying it won't. I'm not saying it will, but 100% if they're not fascinated with Anthony Richardson, it's something I could see happening.
Do you think this might be my last question before we move on to the next proper team you have on your list from free agency and how it's impacted this draft? The Cardinals at 3, and obviously the perception idea would be now Will Anderson would be the guy. Do you think like because Will Anderson is thought like he's the best defensive player in this draft? He's the first guy I'm seeing everyone mock in terms of the defensive side of the ball. Is there a possible way that the Cardinals could be enticed to trade, like maybe with a Seattle or a Detroit, to trade out of that pick? Like, do you think it's a possibility, maybe staying on those two teams, or maybe if there's someone else in the top 10 that could make that leap? Like a team trading up to 3 to get Will Anderson specifically. I know trade ups for a guy like that, like they're I want to say they're a bit rare, but with the talk of Will Anderson, do you think there could be a team willing to make that trade here, Stu? And maybe it's one of the two that we just finished talking about.
Maybe. I mean, though, if you're talking going after defensive ends, it would be or edge rushers. I technically defensive ends, I guess, is a position kind of fluid as much these days, but it would be those two teams. I think more likely 3 is the trading spot for a quarterback, but I think it yeah, I mean, I would say it would probably, if you're looking at edge rushers, maybe Atlanta slides up in there. It depends. Maybe they want Skoronski or Paris Johnson Jr., but you look at it, I think the third overall pick is going to probably more than likely it's going to be one of these two. It's either going to be a quarterback, whether it's Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, or it's going to be Will Anderson.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I was just definitely curious. Chris,
Oh, definitely. And I think it's possible, but here's, I think, the question Seattle is going to have to ask, because they're trading within the NFC West to get up to 3. Arizona's going to ask for a king's ransom. Are you willing to give that up for a guy like Will Anderson? Well, you can get a Tyree Wilson, who, I say this, they're not exactly the same when I say this, but he's kind of the Anthony Richardson of this defensive end class, where you look at all the potential he could have. He could be a guy we look at in 10 years and say he's the best defensive end in this draft. But do you really take that risk? It's a question to ask, especially with how much you would probably have to give up if you are Seattle.
Right, and especially I feel like the Cardinals would rake them over the coals, to say the very least.
100%.
How Tyree Wilson got hurt, right?
I think so, but I think he's going to be ready to go. And I'm not alone with everybody that has him ranked high, but yeah, I think he did get hurt, but he's shown some potential. I mean, this is a guy who, again, we talk about potential with the quarterbacks and all that kind of stuff, but you talk about a guy who you look at, if he can fix a couple things, going to wreak havoc on quarterbacks for a decade. I mean, just an absolute monster at the pass rushing side of things. He's got to fix some things, hand wise. He's got to be better with his hands. I think he's got some other things he's got to work on, but overall, I mean, Tyree Wilson's my number 2 defensive end in this draft class, and as long as everything checks out, great. And from what I'm hearing, a lot of teams have him as number 2 as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the injury history is something you do got to worry about as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Jurg?
No, yeah, that's about it in terms of just that whole conversation. That we start with the Raiders and we go to the Lions and Seahawks and we get to Tyree Wilson. I love the tales we weave there. Who do we got up next here, Stu? In terms of these list of teams who free agency has impacted what their decisions could be.
I don't know. I'm going to say this, and it's not necessarily how it impacts their decisions as much as it impacts their number, who they draft. And I don't mean that in a sense of what decision they make. And let me just say, I think Carolina, you look at what Carolina's done with Miles Sanders, you look at what they've done with Adam Thielen and some other guys as well. It's given me very much 2013 Philadelphia Eagles, the dream team vibes, where everything seems too perfect that maybe they're going to crash and burn horribly. I think they've made a lot of good decisions. I'm a big Adam Thielen guy. Miles Sanders was underrated. He had a good year, but
Hayden Hurst.
Yeah, they got Hayden Hurst. They have this all-star cast of talent at the coaching position, but I just wonder if it's all going to come together or not. Like, those are the questions for me where I look at it and I say it all seems like it's too good to be true. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they plug in C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson or Will Levis, and they come out and they're cooking for the next decade. But there's still Adam Thielen's old, higher risk of injury. Miles Sanders has really only had one like super productive year, which was last year, which was a career high for him. And he's been hurt a lot. So there's a lot of question marks surrounding the Panthers. Obviously, I mean, they're picking number 1 overall, but they made a lot of signings in the offseason this year. I just question how well it's going to work for them. And this could be a team that's either going to be 7-8 wins next year or a team that picking number 1 overall again next year.
Started with the Panthers? Or were we ending with the Panthers?
Maybe. Well, actually, you know what? Because I like the fact that Stu brought up what they've done, because this is a thing that I've kind of, now I think I might be alone in this take. Stu, when it comes to the Houston Texans, they're a barren wasteland. Like, I know there's some talent on that team realistically, but I feel when it comes to the rookie quarterbacks here, like, I feel like the guy that's going to get drafted by Houston, we're going to have to put them on like a watch list to make sure that they're okay after every single game. Like, whatever quarterback goes to the Texans is going to get physically abused. Because aside from Laramie Tunsil, like, yes, I know they're NFL starting offensive linemen, but compared to other teams, it's not there. Like, when it comes to the Texans and who they're getting at quarterback, and they signed Case Keenum, funny enough. So the prodigal son returns to the Houston Texans in Case Keenum. Like, and you mentioned earlier in this conversation, more so with Anthony Richardson, is there a probable scenario with either of, if you want to lump in the Panthers as well, because they did get, the man, the myth, the legend, Andy Dalton as well. Like, is there a scenario where either of these teams are going to give their rookie QBs a marination period of like, look, let's sit them. I'm not talking about like a full season anyway, or like half a season, because that just doesn't happen with top overall picks anymore. But like 3, maybe 4 games to let these guys adjust to everything in practice, and maybe give them reps later in the game, so it's not a full like. Because I want to firmly admit I'm scared for Bryce Young and his well being if he goes to the Houston Texans. I feel aside from Laramie Tunsil, like that dude is going to be stranded on an island. So, do you think there's a possible scenario where this could happen, or is it just going to be straight up like, hey, the Panthers and Texans, they get their guys, they're playing day one? Because, like, I'll admit, this has been my take. I don't think the Texans should pick a quarterback this year. I feel like they should continue to build out that squad, because the guy that they're going to draft is going to be put on witness protection program by the end of just this season. And I think with next year's draft class, we've already mentioned the top 2 quarterbacks several times. I'm going to be real with you. Even with the rookie QB the Texans take, they're going to be a top 3 to top 5 pick next year anyway. So maybe this is me, and maybe I'm in cuckoo land right here, and maybe Stu will talk me out of it. But like, is there somehow a chance, Stu, that the Texans don't go QB, or if they do, they sit Bryce Young for a few games, like just so he doesn't get murdered right straight from the books of week 1?
Only because, and I listen, I know Mel is your colleague. Only because I want a who the hell is Mel Kiper anyway take again. I hope they do, because you're going to get a Mel Kiper who says this is why the Houston Texans are picking at the top of the draft every year, not competing for championships like other teams, like he did when the Colts didn't take Trent Dilfer and they took somebody else. But yes, there's a scenario. Do I think it's likely? I don't know. It depends. I mean, they have a defensive-minded head coach now. Maybe he feels the same way. Those defensive-minded guys typically lean towards bigger quarterbacks. I mean, Rex Ryan had Mark Sanchez. It worked for a little bit, but we saw a little bit later on that the smaller guy didn't necessarily work out that well. You look at Ron Rivera; he had Cam Newton, 6'6", 250, ran unbelievably. So you look at who these defensive-minded guys have, and it's likely it could happen. I think maybe the fan base would. Houston doesn't have very many fans, anyways. I'm not trying to be mean, but
it's okay. You can say it.
they're going to lose whatever fans they do have. I think if they don't take Bryce Young, just because of how much that's been talked about in all these mock drafts. But I look at it and say, if you could sell them, you can't necessarily say, hey, we're going to tank. But if you could say, hey, let's write it out with Case Keenum, wink, wink, and get Caleb Williams next year, and we're going to build all this stuff up to where when Caleb Williams or Drake May comes in, they get off and running, then okay, maybe, but I I don't know. Jurg, you got me thinking now because it's like
I'm just saying
I
Davis Mills
I had
deserves one
Bryce
more
Young
chance.
locked in at 2, but it's like I've never really thought maybe they don't take a quarterback, but maybe they don't like Bryce Young. Maybe the size scares them, and then they look at it and they say, Will Levis definitely ain't going to be the number 2 overall pick. We
Right.
would never do that. And
Nor
Anthony
Anthony
Richardson, there's too many question marks.
Right.
So maybe they do say, let's take Will Anderson, and here we come, Caleb Williams. So
and let me say, my bad to interrupt you, Stu. Let me say the reason why I've thought this way for a bit, I have nothing against Bryce Young. I'm trying to protect him because I think whoever is back there for Houston next year is a lamb to slaughter. Like, that's why I bring it up, because like I say this with all due respect. I know these are professional athletes, and I think for the most part, I try to be like, Stu knows this, and Chris, you know this. You both have podcasts with me for like what combined 4 or 5 years just between each of you separately. Like, I try to be nice to the pro athletes compared to most people, like some people on Twitter that we talked about last week.
Like me, I'm pretty brutal.
But I aside from Laramie Tunsil, the offensive line there scares me. On defense, I know they have Devin Singletary there. You know, he's the corner of the future for them. And I want to say they also drafted a safety in last year's draft who started for them. I think, did they get Jalen Petrie from Baylor last year?
Yeah, they did.
And the two of them are
he
good.
picked Matt Ryan off a couple of times. Right.
And the two of them are good. Like, there's still some, things to build. And I'm sure, like you said, with a defensive-minded coach now, like, I'm just saying, like, for me personally, there's a little bit of trepidation of, and okay, yes, they traded for Shaq Mason, ladies and gentlemen. You still need 3/5 of the offensive line to be competent. And, like, I just feel that they, like, the rookie that goes there, and I don't mean this from a play style comparison, but David Carr and what happened to him, Stu. Now, I'm not saying he would have been anything, if they were better prepped, but
you don't have a shot when you're getting hit.
He got abused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, Jerry. I'm going to look at, like, you were, when we first met at when you were at the Off the Ball Network, when we first met, it was that 2020 NFL draft. It was, or the 2021 NFL draft. It was the Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, Trey Lance draft. And I don't know if you remember, but I smacked the table telling everybody the Jets should not take Zach Wilson. They had Sam Darnold.
Correct.
Take Penei Sewell with the draft, build that offensive line. You could get your quarterback next year or the year following. Could be the same scenario here for Houston. It very well could be where you swallow it. You say, let's go with Giraffe Neck and Davis Mills one more year, or maybe we roll with Case Keenum, who played well for us, been to an NFC Championship game. I'm not saying it's going to happen, by the way, but I'm just saying, you can always sell it. You can always market it as, look at this. This is what happened. You can shine the turd up a little bit, right? But it could, very well could happen. They get an offensive line, then you get a Quentin Johnston or a Jordan Addison with your second pick in the first round. But you also got to think they have a second round pick as well.
Right.
And so is there going to be a DeJuan Jones from Ohio State there? You're going to take maybe the kid from Tennessee falls. Does Broderick Jones from Georgia fall? So, like, they have a chance to get that offensive line in the second and third rounds to help build up their offensive line. But I'm with you. I mean, I think if you're not sold on Bryce Young, here's my thing. Teams don't listen to me because I'm a podcaster in Indiana. No one's going to listen to me. But my logic to them is, if you're not convicted, don't take it because you feel like you have to. Don't take Bryce Young because you feel like you have to. If you don't like him, take whoever you want. I wouldn't take Pierce Skoronsky or Paris Johnson here. I would probably take, Will Anderson. But, you need, like you said, you got to build around that young quarterback. You don't want him getting hurt. You don't want him to get hit a lot. And so if there's a guy at 2 that you're not thrilled about, don't take him.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for 2 seconds, and for the tech, I can't believe I'm doing this for the fucking Texans. But like, so they get Bryce Young at 2. They also do have the 12th pick in the draft. So like,
yes,
I don't think Paris Johnson's gonna fall to them.
But Osiris Torrance could be there,
Or Broderick Jones or someone. Like I do
or the
think
kid from Tennessee could
there
be there.
there
Yeah.
is there is options here, and like I'm not saying two guys automatically fixes your offensive line, but right there you will have two cornerstones already for your offensive line,
Well,
and
you'll
just
have Laramie Tunsil.
exactly.
Then they signed a free agent already, and then you add Broderick Jones or Paris Johnson Jr.
Yeah,
or whoever, Osiris Torrance. And so you add those guys, and now, like Jurg said, you know, now you have 3/5 of your offensive line. Now it's fixed.
exactly.
Now
Yeah,
it's time to play ball,
Yeah.
and you can get maybe a Josh Downs or a Jalen Hyatt in the second round. So yeah, maybe that's what they do. Maybe they take CJ Stroud or Bryce Young, and then at 12 they say offensive line, here we come.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, at the end of the day, I'm just trying to think of these quarterbacks' well-being here, man. Like
Me too,
I,
dude. I'm an Andrew Luck guy. Trust me, I know.
I don't want them to have like the mental state of what me, Chris, and Dame usually are on a weekly basis, because that's not what a professional athlete's mental health should be.
Let
at
me
all.
ask you this. Let me ask you this. Do
Mhm.
you think when when y'all get Aaron Rodgers, do you think
God.
they actually make the right decision? They do what the Packers didn't do and get them some
Chris.
weapons, or do you think they go, let's go defense, guys?
I think in the event they don't give up their first round pick, which they shouldn't.
I didn't even think about that.
I mean,
But
I don't know with the Jets, but like I think they go offensive line with the 13th pick if someone's there. Um, I think they've made some moves here in free agency with um Alan Lazard, and they just got McCole Hardman. I don't think they go uh wide receiver here. I do think like I think they love their wide receiver core.
I think after last season, I don't think Aaron Rodgers wants to throw to a rookie receiver again.
Garrett Wilson was pretty awesome, but like,
I mean,
and also
Well, I mean,
like,
he's in year 2 now, so he's not a rookie
yeah,
anymore.
exactly. Also, and like you don't know what's gonna happen with OBJ. I don't know, but I do think they go offensive line here because the thing is with the Jets is that their offensive line. I know they get shat on and rightfully so. They did get a little beat up. We don't look. Mekhi Becton is like that's another conversation for itself. Elijah Vera Tucker's gonna be back. I think it was Lake Tomlinson that they signed. That was I don't know how good he was, but like I think if you could get another offensive lineman here in this draft, and Max Mitchell also wasn't that bad, Stu. I don't know what you think of him, but I do think there's potential for the Jets' offensive line to kind of have a resurgence to not be as bad as everyone thinks they are. I do think a big part of it was because they got beat up, and Mekhi Becton's never playing, so like get some health. Maybe draft an offensive lineman here. Becton is healthier. Maybe we're on the come up in terms of offensive line. I'm not saying it's going to be like the best one in the NFL, but I don't know. I'm a little bit more hopeful for the Jets offensive line, but also I don't know who my quarterback's going to be next year because this Aaron Rodgers trade isn't happening yet.
I mean, who knows? Maybe you guys will trade for Bakhtiari too. I think maybe Rodgers wants him.
maybe you guys can roll out. Maybe you guys can roll out the MILF Hunter again and hope it works out, right?
Oh God, we're just giving Chris so much PTSD here. Stu, do you have any more teams that we could do some rapid fire on here left on your list?
I mean, none that in free agency
Mm.
could happen. I mean, I think keep an eye. And I'm not saying this because they're my team, but keep an eye on the Colts. Maybe the Colts look at it and they say we don't like Will Levis, we don't like Anthony Richardson. I think the perfect fit for them is Hendon Hooker. He plays a lot like Jalen Hurts. He has a similar style. My perfect draft, now that they don't have the number 1 overall pick and they can't get CJ Stroud, would be take like a Paris Johnson Jr. or a Pierre Skoronski. You fix your left tackle position that you haven't been able to fix since Anthony Costanzo left. Take Hendon Hooker in the second round. So that could be something Chris Ballard does because he does like to trade and stuff. But no, I don't have anybody else free agency wise.
So I do have. This isn't necessarily a draft related thing, but there is one player that we haven't like aside from Rodgers that's been a topic of conversation. I maybe we could fit him in here at the end of the show because I would like to get Stu's take on this because I haven't had a convo with Stu about this guy, but Lamar Jackson, Stu. I don't know. We just breached the topic a couple weeks ago about just the whatever was it the non-exclusive tag that the Ravens ended up putting on Lamar, where a team can technically negotiate and sign with him, but they have to give up the 2 first-round picks if they do end up,
Yep.
like, if the contract
Yeah.
goes through. Like, your take, Stu, on the Lamar Jackson thing, and, obviously because with first-round picks now being in play because of the whole contract thing, that'll affect, like, that'll be a first-round pick this year and a first-round pick next year. Like, is
Yeah, I
is
mean,
is there a team, like, no, yeah, talk with it. Like, I don't necessarily have a question, but, like, your take of, like, what could that be like in terms of a team with a pick this year could be interested in doing that because, your first round pick this year is pretty high. Boom, you use your first round pick next year. But will you be in a better spot next year because now you have Lamar Jackson instead of whatever that first round pick was going to be? Like, I don't like what are your thoughts on it? Because I haven't had a conversation with you about Lamar yet.
I mean, are these teams that are rolling out Lamar Jackson, are they dumb? I'm
Collusion.
just, I mean that in the nicest way possible, but Lamar's, and not in the same sense of, well, Carson Wentz was a former league MVP, but he's a former league MVP. I know Wentz never won it, but the point is, like, he's a former league MVP. At his healthiest, he's a top 3 to 7 guy in the league, and like all these teams are like, we don't want to trade for him. We're not going to do. Okay, enjoy being bad then. I guess, like, just enjoy it. And for Baltimore, it's the same thing I asked Minnesota fans. I already mentioned it. You get rid of Lamar. Who are you going to get that puts up the production that Lamar puts up? This is what I don't understand. You don't want to sign him to the guaranteed contract because then you set it up for everybody else and you're going to be the most hated owner in the league. It won't be the Browns anymore because then Jalen Hurts will get guaranteed. Justin Herbert will get guaranteed. Joe Burrow will get, the line goes on, right? But my God, you're going to let a guy like Lamar Jackson potentially walk out the door. And now, like, do they remember what it was like with Tommy Banks? Do they remember what that was like? Do they remember what it was like with Kyle Bowler?
I guess not.
Like, oh my, like, this is one of the most mind-boggling things I've ever seen. And I know people are bringing up collusion, and it's not the same collusion as it was with, like, Colin Kaepernick, where owners are, like, physically calling each other, but it's collusion in a sense where, like, it's kind of like baseball and their dumb unwritten rules. It's like an unwritten thing I think that's coming on right now in the NFL where it's like we're not gonna give him guaranteed money because if we give him guaranteed, we've opened up hell's gate to all this money that's going to go out the window from this point till the end of forever. So, I mean, I don't get it, guys. I don't get it. Lamar's a former league MVP. He's still at his peak.
Right.
He's a top 10 guy. Like, what are we even doing?
Some of the stuff that these owners do, man, is just absolutely wild. No, I did want to bring that up, Stu, because like it's just weird to me, and I'm with you. I don't think it's necessarily. I mean, if people want to just yell and scream collusion, sure, I'm not going to argue against.
I think it is, but not in the same sense of what people think it is. Like, these owners are not calling each other and being like, "Hey, don't sign Lamar because if you do that, then I'm going to have to pay Joe Burrow this amount, and let's not do that." Like, I don't think it's that much. I think it's very unwritten and kind of like a head nod in the hallway. Like, I see what you're saying, man.
It's a power structure thing where the NFL sees the other sports and they know what structure they have, and
they don't want to be the NBA where like the 1,200 guy on your bench is getting paid $40 million, and you're like, why am I paying this guy so much money, and he averages like 6 points per game?
Right. It's just one of these fascinating things that I hope for like everyone's sake relatively soon here it just gets figured out because like just so Lamar can actually have a team here. The Ravens, I don't care for them anymore. They could kick rocks. They could sell on the railroad for all I care. Like at this point with the Baltimore Ravens, I don't care. But
what Baltimore did to you?
I not pay a man that deserves his money. I'm all for guys getting paid here at the end of the day.
Man.
Exactly. Pay that man.
Hey, Jets, trade for that man, please.
I mean, hey,
Rodgers.
I don't want Rodgers. I want Lamar.
It's very true here, Stu. Chris is not a fan of Aaron Rodgers and his
Whoa.
I'm sorry.
I'm an Aaron Rodgers guy.
It's the off-field stuff just bothers me.
Maybe if you could, maybe take some ayahuasca.
Maybe I should
go into a darkness retreat for a little bit. Maybe you'll come out and you'll love Aaron Rodgers.
Look, it's very simple, Stu. If Aaron Rodgers brings a championship to New York, my perspective will flip
And you don't care. If he brings a championship, you don't care if he's doing
He can
ayahuasca
do
in
whatever
the
he
off
wants,
season.
bro. He can do. I'll rip up my vaccine card for him if he wants.
Aaron Rodgers could run for the city of New York, and Chris will vote for him.
Yeah,
Chris will vote
Yeah.
for him if he wins the Jets a Super Bowl.
easily.
Just write him in on the ballot.
Yeah.
like it's that level.
Well, if you don't find him, if he like does come to New York and you guys can't find him, I would look for some kind of like Bruce Wayne bat cave under the ground.
I mean, that
Maybe
guy.
he wants to sit in the dark a little bit. But I'm an Aaron Rodgers guy. I'm a. This is a different conversation for a different podcast.
Right.
But he's a top 3 quarterback all time guy. So I'm high on Aaron Rodgers. Very, very high on Aaron.
I will say this, to be fair to Chris, like he is high on Aaron Rodgers on the field, but when it comes to
Is he off the field?
That's what turns
Me
me
too.
off. That's what
Me
turns me
too.
off.
Yeah.
Quick, Stu, before we talk about our last point, because we're an hour 17 in, where do you have Patrick Mahomes all time?
Right now?
Yeah,
just a general thing. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
need to be your exact.
Probably
thing.
7.
7.
6, 7.
Ooh, okay.
Like I think it's too early
Okay.
to say top 5.
But he's also done so much that he
Yeah.
has to at least be close.
Yes, that he's knocking on heaven's door, right? In the sense of, you want to talk about some Bob Dylan and stuff like that, but yeah, he's there. He's right there. I mean,
Where do you think he ends up at the end of his career?
2.
2. Oh, and you think number 1?
1 or 2. 1 or 2.
Okay, so you do the doors open for him to be number 1 for you.
You have to have the LeBron James conversation, I think, with Mahomes, because nobody's going to have the 7 Super Bowl rings, 10 Super Bowl appearances that Tom Brady's going to have. Just like LeBron's never going to have MJ stuff, right? He's never going to have the 6-0 in the finals.
Right.
But you got to kind of have that conversation,
Right.
that LeBron conversation when you talk about Mahomes is maybe he doesn't have 7 rings, but let's say maybe he gets 4 rings and he wins 8 or 9 league MVPs. Like, are we going to sit here and say he didn't win 7 Super Bowls though? Like,
and if he's the Super Bowl MVP in every single one of them,
it's very possible he could be he'll probably always be 2 because LeBron or Tom's going to get that Michael Jordan treatment where 7 rings, like they're going to have no other conversation for you, no other piece of things to back up why MJ or Tom Brady is to go other than 7 rings or 6 rings, but so he'll always battle that. But I think you're going to have the LeBron conversation when you talk about Patrick Mahomes in the future.
For sure. That's how I feel about it as well. Can't also exclude Joe Montana. He's also on that list too.
Well, I mean, but he's
all right, Lawrence Taylor, calm down there.
I'm sorry.
This is a conversation we could have for another podcast because we could make an hour-long podcast.
For sure. Last thing we're going to talk about before we wrap it up: Jets traded Elijah Moore and a 3rd-round pick to the Cleveland Browns for their 2nd round pick. This kind of came out of left field, fellas, because I know Elijah Moore kind of had that weird, situation with the Jets last season. I think it was because of LaFleur, the Jets offensive coordinator. He's having issues with him. And also Zach Wilson was his quarterback, so I understood his frustration. I do think he was a little bit immature about it. But he gets traded. I was very surprised because I think, well, if they bring in Aaron Rodgers, I think this is a perfect opportunity to kind of, resurrect Elijah Moore's career. Not that he was down in the dumps, but it's just like, okay, now we could start now. Now we'll get to see Elijah Moore's true potential. But I don't know, man. He gets traded. I thought they were just gonna give it at least a season to see what they're like a new quarterback. You go ahead.
Here's my thing.
They're gonna trade that 2nd-round pick for Aaron Rodgers that they got.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I thought. Yeah,
I think all this is to get more capital.
Yep.
To get Aaron Rodgers into town. That's what that was. That was let's get 2 2nd-round picks, or let's get the 2nd-round pick and whatever. Let's mortgage the franchise to go get our guy. So I mean, that's what it was in my opinion. That's what I think of the trade is. They were trying to do what they could to get more ammo to go get Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, because it's still being worked out here.
I know. Like, what the heck's taking so? Tell your boy Shefty to figure out what's going on, Jurg. All right.
Man, I don't know how I feel about getting that extra capital and the expense of one of our young wide receivers. I know they weren't seeing eye to eye, but damn, bro,
Well,
Or
also,
feel
I think at the end of the day, Chris, when you consider the Mecole Hardman signing and like yeah, yes, it was a legitimate case that the Packers should have gotten a first round receiver for the longest time, which will be the funniest thing in the world if they do that this year for Jordan Love. But in the
I would
same
love
breath,
that.
they
right?
might. Like they out of straight petty, they will
Yeah,
probably.
but between Alan Lazard, Mecole Hardman, and now Garrett Wilson, and the potential that OBJ could become a Jet too, the wildness of this world, like
Man.
I feel like Elijah Moore would have lost his spot because I also feel
That's a good
maybe
point.
this.
I don't know though. I mean,
I know he hasn't lived up to it, but like I feel like they'll want to work him in over a guy that look, I sympathize for Elijah Moore. I think he will do a fine job on the
yeah,
Browns, but I just don't think between last season with what happened and then this year now that it's Nathaniel Hackett, I also think it's just going to be better for Elijah Moore because good God, who wants to go from Mike LaFleur to Nathaniel Hackett as your offensive coordinators? Like it's just one of those things that maybe this will just be maybe for both sides this will be beneficial because like I feel like God, this happens in hockey so much. Maybe I'm just taking the mindset here, like guys that get traded to or leave a team and go to another and find success, and it's immediately like, oh, the other team, you are stupid as hell. It's like it's not always the case. It's just
yeah,
sometimes
I get
the
that.
structure was not there. Like think of this past season, a guy who just had a career year wide receiving in AJ Brown. He was great in Tennessee, but he like these stats in Tennessee just because at the end of the day it was a different offense, and also Ryan Tannehill was the quarterback, and that's bottom tier. But like it was a different offense, a different way things were run, different targets and touches,
Yeah,
etc. Like it's not necessarily the Tennessee Titans didn't understand the talent of AJ Brown. It was a combination of multiple factors that led to we're not going to be able to pay him right now, and with this roster we have, let's get something back for him at this point. And maybe for the Jets, like yeah, you got to bite the bullet. It sucks to lose a guy of Elijah Moore's caliber and potential with 2 years left on a rookie pay scale, but if it gets you the extra ammunition you need for this franchise quarterback that you haven't had since Joe Namath, you gotta you sometimes have to bite that bullet. And hey, here's the thing: you bite the bullet, it could save you, it could also still kill you. So that's what it is for the Jets here. Like I just think that's what it is. But yeah, I'm with you guys. What the hell is taking so long in this trade
I really
package?
wanted to see how Elijah Moore would do with Lamar Jackson on the Jets. But what do we make of this for the Browns? I mean,
I mean,
they
not
needed a
much.
wide receiver. They needed one.
Yeah, I mean, not much. I mean, they needed a wide receiver, but I think they're all right. Listen, people on the field, strictly on the field, Deshaun Watson, like let's not the guy hadn't played in 2 years. Let's not take the 58% completion percentage and how bad he played last year as what he is. Like at his peak, he's a top 4 quarterback in this league. I mean, unbelievably.
Are
The
you
last time we saw
so are you optimistic that he could pick it up the next season?
100%. I
Okay.
mean, it took a little bit. I mean, think about this. You haven't played a sport where men who are 285 pounds run 4.640s are coming at you, and it moves so quickly. You haven't played that sport in 2 years, and everyone just expected you to just pick up the ball, come out, and make the Browns Super Bowl champs the second you stepped in. It wasn't going to happen that way. It just wasn't. And Deshaun's been a guy who struggled with accuracy issues at different points in time in his career when he's been successful. So, yes, they're going to turn it around. I don't think they need a whole lot of help. This is a team who's going to compete in the AFC. This is a team who is going to be a playoff team next year, and maybe gets an upset over the Bills, maybe gets an upset over the Bengals, maybe even surprises the Chiefs a little bit, because at the end of the day, Deshaun Watson on the field is still Deshaun Watson.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And
I
Elijah
mean
Moore
that
could be very
yeah.
useful. Like Deshaun Watson had success in Houston when he had some guys to be deep threats, and Elijah Moore
He also had it when he was throwing the guys who work at Dunkin' Donuts and drive for UPS. So.
exactly, yeah. Like people forget he had at what four? How many yards did he have his last season? He actually played there like
Like
over
4,000 yards and
yeah.
almost. He was a top 4 guy in the league.
Yeah, and he was throwing it to us. He was throwing it to this podcast to get his stats. Like
Pretty much.
Oof.
the guy has talent.
Yeah, I think it's also going to be more helpful for Amari Cooper because it'll be
Yeah.
someone to get the pressure off him. But yeah, the Browns, I mean, they have a shot to be a legitimate team in their division, especially. But they could make some noise in that in the AFC in total. I'm with you, Stu. They could be because I do like some of the talent on the roster. But fuck Deshaun Watson though. Okay. Is that it? Should we wrap it up?
I think so.
Yeah, that
Okay.
sounds good to me. Let's end it on that note.
Yeah. What an episode. Phenomenal episode. Fellas, thank you so much for steering the ship with me. Stu, always an honor to have you on. You'll be back soon because we have our mock drafts coming up. Dame, unfortunately, we'll be back next week. Jurg, before we get to our the socials, Stu, you want to plug anything?
Yeah, I mean, I have check out the Morning Brew with Stew podcast. I just dropped a new episode. Interviewed a former Butler basketball player. I'm a Butler basketball fan, and it's out right now. Working on getting some interviews set up for next week. Working on draft content. We're going to be talking about the NFL draft. Stay tuned for mid-June. Mid-June's when the fun begins, in my opinion. That's when my top 32 quarterback rankings come out in the NFL. That's when the fun begins. Follow the Morning Brew with Stew on Twitter at StewMorning. Follow me on Twitter at StewPoc5. New shows coming out weekly. At least try to come out weekly.
Beautiful, beautiful. We'll definitely link that in the description. Jurg, where can they find us on the socials?
Guys, you already know you could follow us at somewhat.sports on Instagram here if you want to keep up with the latest. Very soon here, we're going to be having our mock draft. Like Chris has said, we will be revealing on the podcast, I think maybe 2 weeks' time, what the mock draft order is going to be. We'll be confirming that over in our back channels, aka whenever the hell Dame gets back, we can actually have a convo about this. But we'll be having that very soon. For the podcast itself, we always post updates on when the episodes are out and what we're doing. So please listen to this beautiful podcast that you're currently listening to now. Continue to do so on YouTube and Spotify, somewhat space then sports on both platforms. Like, comment, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Let us know your thoughts in the comments on our episodes. Please give us a 5-star rating on Spotify. Leave us a review. What do you like? Do you want more Stew and more guests in general? Trust, guys, we want more guests. And, you know, and trust me, we want more Stew because Stew is just an absolute pro at this. We appreciate you for coming on, brother. Just in general, let us know what you love about the show. Let us know what you want us to do better at because, you know, we're not perfect in any way, shape, or form. Stew just blew me and Chris out the water in terms of NFL knowledge because he's just that much of a legend. If you want us to up our game to be at Stew's level, you know, let us know in the comments and we'll be sure to do that here on a weekly basis on what I feel is the best sports podcast going today. Yes, competing with the Morning Brew Stew for that monarchy in the podcasting platform. Because at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, the Somewhat Sports Podcast is a podcast by the people for the beautiful people.
Beautifully put as always, Jurg. Beautifully put as always. I want to run through a brick wall. To all the listeners listening, if you made it this far, we appreciate you. Stu, we appreciate you even more. And until next time, of course, peace.